everyone. Chamriapswa. Thank you for joining us today at the 8th Annual Cambodia Town Film Festival virtual edition. We are having some wonderful guests today, some great documentary filmmakers. We have Calvin Keo.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
He is the director of The Photographer, a documentary about a former refugee and genocide survivor who retraces his photographic past to find healing and closure in the present. Mm-hmm. We also have Alice Gu.
Hello.
She is the director of the documentary The Donut King, which is the journey of Ted Noi, a story about a refugee escaping Cambodia, arriving in America in 1975 and building an unlikely multi-million-dollar empire baking America's great favorite pastry, the donuts. All right, thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, for sure.
Yeah. Calvin, let's start with you. The Photographer, beautiful, beautiful film, just emotional, subtle in its storytelling. I really love that you gave all the scenes a lot of room to breathe, and you weren't just, we're able to really see the beauty of Cambodia and feel the emotional impact of every scene. So I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so can you just tell us about how this came about and why you decided to accompany Moi back to Cambodia?
Well, first off, Moi is my father, and growing up, I've always kind of like heard stories like that he felt the need to tell when he felt comfortable enough. And then eventually I got into filmmaking, and then I wanted to make sure that, if there's a way that I could honor that and kind of honor his story, that we would make it possible. And then so the story came up because I wanted to just kind of allow him to, reconnect with his past. And then, it originally started as a short doc that kind of led into more of a feature, because we didn't know exactly where the story would kind of unfold and if we would have enough for a feature. So first I had to get my dad on board and see if he would be comfortable enough to actually allow us to explore that side of his past. And fortunately enough, he was on board, and we just went with it. And very emotional, very personal, but I'm glad that it turned out the way that it did. So yeah, that's how we kind of led into The Photographer.
Got it. And had you been to Cambodia before that trip?
I've been there once for like a backpacking trip with my siblings, and then kind of fell in love with the country. A tough history, but beautiful people and like a great culture. And I wanted to make sure that like if I had the opportunity to go back there and do a film, that like I would take it up on that and stuff. So yeah.
Great. So I mean, yeah, it is a family film through and through, but it is a family story that so many other people can identify with. A lot of the same thing of being separated and having to make those really hard decisions of, should I stay in this place that I know, go back to Cambodia, even though they have those struggles, or should I go someplace totally foreign, totally new and scary? And it's really drastic to see how the two different kind of timelines of this family, how they really diverge like that. What would you say was kind of the feeling that your father, that Moi, had when he was going back and seeing, for how his sister had been dealing with all of her personal struggles?
I think that the one part that was tough for him was, like having to face that reality that they've been separated for so long, and their relationship has become estranged through the distance aspect. And, like also realizing that the decisions made were like the cause of, the relationship being strained. And like, I guess, allowing them to kind of, explain to each other, or like their reasoning for it, and, like how they can move forward with, trying to find closure, even though, in a perfect world, they would be together. And I think that I wanted to make sure that the audience could see that even though there is a separation, that there is still love, there's still, a bitterness, with emotions, with trying to, keep the relationship strong, and, hopefully that they can find somewhat of a closure with that little connection that they did make in the film.
Yeah.
And what was tying it together was the fact that, like, the recent passing of their brother, that maybe it's time to make amends through that, so.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I think it's the tagline of your film. It's "There's no story without struggle." And yeah, that's kind of one of the biggest struggles you can have, is to lose a close family member like that. For you, during the filming process, what do you think was one of your biggest struggles? Having filmed a documentary in Cambodia myself, I know that there are a lot of unexpected struggles that come with filming in Cambodia.
One of the tough part was like the language situation. Even though like I could speak it enough to communicate with my father, it's trying to get the right answer. I mean, the right question, so that the answers could be provided in the language. And then also, we were working with a small crew, and trying to maneuver through, like the hecticness of Cambodian life. And we actually were searching for his sister and his friend through just, like a rough idea of where they could be, and then like with the fixer that we had there, he was pretty much just trying to like help us get to where we needed to be, because the phone numbers changed, there's no address. And like a lot of people don't feel comfortable when there's cameras in play, so a lot of it was us being like very shush about it, and trying to bring as less attention to us as possible was the tough part, like trying to get the story, but also not be as like out there that like, hey, we're filming something. So
Yeah.
So.
Well, you did a great job. You were really able to bring out the emotions. Like that definitely happened. So that was great. I'm gonna pop it back over to Alice for a second. Alice, Donut King, what a fun film. I mean, you touched on a lot of serious, somber moments throughout the film, but overall it was just like so much fun. In fact, I actually went and got a donut like almost immediately after watching the film. There's one just around the corner from me, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So yeah, it was really fun. What made you approach it with that kind of, I would say, joy, even though again, like you are touching on a lot of heavy stuff too?
There are a couple of reasons. First and foremost, as Calvin, anybody who knows of Cambodia's history, it's such a beautiful country and such a beautiful culture. There's a pretty dark period, right, of dictatorship and genocide and war. And and I feel like a lot of people kind of casually know, that maybe they've heard of the killing fields, they've heard of Pol Pot, but that's kind of like, oh yeah, I've heard of it, but they don't really know. And I really wanted to, well, we're nothing without our history and where we came from, right? So it was very important for me to want to tell that story. But it's not always the easiest thing to watch. If somebody's like on a Friday night looking at Netflix, oh, hey, I'm going to watch a movie on genocide and Civil War, maybe not necessarily the case, but exactly. Everybody loves donuts. And everybody loves donuts, and everyone loves donuts so much they don't even think about where their donuts come from. They don't think about where the pink box came from. It's just a given. It's just this American joy, this pastry. And that one man, one refugee from Cambodia was able to influence the market, and in turn have so many different Cambodian families achieve the American dream and become successful in their adopted country while making America's favorite pastry. You know, I just felt like that was a way, you know, it was a bit of a Trojan horse, or a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. It's like, oh yeah, I want to watch a movie about donuts today. Oh my God, you know, donuts are everywhere. It's Homer Simpson. It's in Parks and Rec. It's everywhere in popular culture, including you see the pink box. And to like open people's eyes, like that's where the pink box came from. I had no idea, and it was
I had no idea.
the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, that was mind blowing. I was like, wait, what? I really had no idea. And I love that it was a Cambodian immigrant that was here. And that's kind of like the dream, right? To make that mark on your new country. And he really did. I mean, especially here in LA and California, and like, you know, all around the US, but in pop culture, just knowing the story behind it. And I loved also that another thing I didn't know is that he like kind of paved the way for a lot of other Cambodians to come and set up their own donut shops, and just really opened it up that way.
It did. And you know, it's like, it's quite remarkable. I mean, it's, you know, they're immigrants, but they work so hard so that their kids don't have to have the same kind of life like they did. So I'm making an assumption here, but Calvin gets to be a filmmaker. Like this is like the job of our dreams. You know, I get to be a filmmaker. I'm not Cambodian, but my parents immigrated here and had a similar ish, you know, from communist China, fleeing regime. And some of the other guys from the Donut King, you know, their parents work hard. They wake up at 2 a.m, start baking donuts, lifting heavy flour bags. I mean, it's super strenuous and hard work so that their kids can be educated and work at Apple, work at Facebook.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the actual real true legacy, is he leaves behind a whole generation of Cambodian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, my internet cut out for a second. Yes. Yeah, so can you tell me too about like how did you meet up with him? I mean, he's so iconic, like now that I know about him, but yeah, how did you get him to agree to do this?
Well, this was a challenge, and again, also I feel like Calvin's story, it's not always easy to get the older generation of Asians to agree, because they don't necessarily understand, like, hey, we're going to make a film and it's going to be cool. I'm not going to make you look bad, and it's not going to exploit you. And so I actually did a cold call to DK's Donuts in Santa Monica. And, you know, I have to say that the stars just kind of aligned for this film. And it was the first donut shop that I called, and I was completely expecting like a no, I can't help you. But answering the phone is a girl who speaks perfect English. And, you know, I give her the cold call, the pitch. And she says, okay, well, you've called the right place and you've called the right person. Ted is my great uncle and I can help you. Are you on Facebook? And I will connect you.
Wow.
And it had been, and she's not even in, it ended up being, she's the donut princess who's in the film.
Okay.
And she doesn't work there all the time, and she's not picking up the phone all the time. You know, so it was really luck. I mean, had I called that time and received a no, I probably would have passed and gone to a different donut shop and, you know, kind of make your way down. I don't know if I would have called back. You know, if you get a no, you don't necessarily call back the same shop. So, So the stars really aligned.
Yeah, that was fate. And did you know more about his story, like all about his story before you started, or it was just you kind of heard something like, did you know about his gambling problems before you started all of this?
A little bit, because there's a lot on him from the LA Times. You know, he was a big deal in the 80s when he became the rags to riches. There was an article about him. It's like the Donut King. They called him the Donut King. That's where the name came from. And then there was another article from the 90s saying the fall from, you know, his fall from riches to rags. So there are a bunch of articles, whether from the LA Times or California Sunday Magazine. I was able to just get, you know, a very superficial version of his story. So I knew a little bit, but I knew that there was a lot more there that I wanted to get into.
Yeah, there's a lot, and it was, yeah, absolutely fascinating to learn about this man's story. Let's jump back over to Calvin. Calvin, I want to ask you about like the camp that you went to, that had been, there's still like the road that was coming down, and he stopped and, you know, left an offering at the temple. How was that, just seeing like the actual place where a lot of that personal tragedies took place?
It was seeing that camp, because I was born there, and like the whole idea is to explore that camp and try to, you know, add that into the story, because it was such a vital part of his life. And like before we went out there, I took a trip to Thailand, maybe about like 9 months before actually filming, just because I wanted to make sure that the camp still existed. And like just finding that was like difficult on its own, because what I got from the locals when I was asking around in Thailand was that like it was an important part of Cambodian people's lives, but in terms of like for Thais and Thailand, it was just a place to hold immigrants. Like it didn't hold that much significance. And so first we had to locate the camp, and then once I was there, it was very emotional, because you can really like, there was something about the area that like showed that there was so much like history there, and like so many people had to endure and like struggle just to kind of survive and then make it out, while others didn't have that opportunity. So it was very emotional for me when I went to see the camp. And in the film, it was very emotional for my dad as well, because, you know, not only did he had to like bury his daughter there, it was just like, it brought so much of his like youth and like, you know, growing up in there and stuff like that, that like, at the same time, he was like a kid in a candy store. He wanted to see everything. He wanted to go, and I used to play here. There was ponds and stuff. And then there was a point where, because it was like the hottest day, and there was a point where I had to tell him, like, I had to pull him to the side. And I'm like, Dad, like, I know you, like, this is where you used to play, and like, this is something that brings you back. But like, at the same time, we have to, you know, get the story. And, you know, it snapped them back into like, okay, we're here to film. And then maybe like an hour after we got everything that we needed there, torrential downpour came in, and we were stuck at the camp for, I think, about an hour. And me and the crew had to make that decision. Like, do we stay here, possibly get stranded here at night? Or do we take the journey back on our mopeds and ride through the rain? And that's what we end up doing. It took us about, it was 45 minutes to get to where the camp was. It took us about 2 hours to get back, just because of like the constant riding, stopping, finding refuge, and then like continuing back. But I think, you know, like seeing the camp and knowing the history of it, that it was very emotional. It was very enlightening. And, you know, like, to see it for what it is now, it's definitely holds that, like, for us anyways, is that, like, you know, the remnant of like what our parents used to go through, and like where they lived, and how important it was, you know, to like be that stepping stone to get us to where we are now, you know. And for me, like, my parents were fortunate enough to get sponsored to Canada, and you know, but that's something that's always played like an important part for them, because when they talk about their youth, they talk about Cawadan and the camp. So yeah, it was good to see my dad be able to experience that.
Yeah, I think he mentioned that there's still a caretaker there that kind of preserves the area.
The UN was able to like make it into an educational center, but there's not a lot of information out there that like the camp exists. And so in terms of like visitation and yearly visitors and stuff, there's not a lot. There's tour guides that bring Cambodians from Cambodia, but it's not a place that, like, you know, it's thriving with tourists and visitors and stuff like that. But they do have that there.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, do you feel like you're the caretaker now of your family's memories with this documentary that you've made?
You could say that, yeah, because when I was out there doing it with my, like, doing the film with my dad, I get phone calls from friends and families that have relatives that's been at the, or went through the camp, and saying that it's allowed them to, like, you know, see, you know, it's my father's story or my family's story, but it also reminds them of what their parents or what their family, you know, must have went through, and the hard decisions that needed to be made, and you know, friends and families that they had to be separated from or lost contact with. But yeah, it's allowed me to, like, kind of preserve that memory for not only myself but my dad's memory, and just the whole experience of being Cambodian, and at one point like an immigrant coming to Canada or North America, and what they must have went through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really just is a very stark reminder of the power of, you know, storytelling through images. And that's the only way that, you know, everyone was able to recognize each other, was because of those photographs that were there. And I think it's important, and I hope that it inspires other Cambodians or other immigrants, anyone who's had to move away from family, to remember, like, the importance of sharing those images, because that's memory and keeping the memory alive. So I think it's beautiful.
Just to elaborate on that, like the component of those photographs, speaking with my father, he said that, like, this was something that, you know, was set up for special occasion, because not a lot of people had money for, you know, family portrait or family pictures and stuff like that. So sometimes when they're moving forward to their sponsored country or going back, like, these are the only things that they have that, you know, reminded them of life there or friends they met along the way. And it's almost something that, like, holds value as such as gold and stuff, because, like, that's all they have of that camp and the memories they have there.
Yeah, absolutely. Alice, let's go back over to you. So I just want to I know we got a really good sense of the Donut King's kind of personality, and I like his kind of like style, kind of like flashy, here we go. But do you think that you saw a side of him that didn't really necessarily come through, or do you think that what we saw was like really what we got with the Donut King?
So the Donut King, Ted Noy, I feel like there is nobody, I've never met anybody like him. And I feel like in the years that I've been working with him and his family now, especially in the beginning, you know, once you think that you figured him out, you totally don't, you know, and he certainly has a charm about him. And there was a certain hustle and a certain charisma that he had, I mean, from birth, and then also that he developed because he was always a hustler. I mean, he was born very poor in a small village, you know, that had only like dirt floors and no roads and chickens in the bathroom, you know, that kind of a place. And from the time that he was little, he had greater ambitions to get out of that kind of life. So he adapts, you know, he develops this, you know, very charming businessman persona. But I do feel like, you know, over the time that we spent together, he really did open up and allow himself to get quite vulnerable and tell me things that were, you know, traumatic, old, painful, and even shameful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's things that he would admit the first time. So I do feel like I got, you know, I captured a real portrait of the real Ted Noy.
And was there anything that was like really surprised you about the whole process of making the documentary?
You know, it's a bit surprising is it was so difficult to get material or archival. You know, these guys were coming and they, as a family, just working to make it in America, you know, it's not like us now. It's like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to document and take a picture like every 5 seconds.
Just like
Film,
Calvin was saying, yeah.
right? Film was expensive. And most of the time these guys were too busy working to be taking pictures. So there weren't so many pictures. And most surprising, I would say, was talking to like the kids, I mean, who are now in their 40s. And I said, well, how did your parents, you know, one of the kids, the youngest son, he actually found out how his parents met from an LA Times article. Like his parents never told him. They were too busy working that they never passed down stories. And he said, I had no idea that my dad did this and my mom was this. Like, you know, and so I would ask the kids, I said, well, why did they, you know, why this? And who's Pol Pot? And they're like, he's a bad guy. Okay, I'm like, but yeah, but like, tell me more. Like, who's the commemorator? Why did this happen? They were like, you know, bad people. You know, and so there was a lot of history and digging around. And I feel like even Cambodians, you know, Cambodian kids don't necessarily know their history, you know, and I kind of thought that was a given. Like, all right, tell me, give me some research and let's dig into this. And they didn't quite have the answers. But what was great, you know, after the couple-year process in doing this, you know, I'd ask the kids, I'm like, do you have pictures? They're like, no, we don't have them. And I'm like, seriously, like, look hard. Look in places that you haven't looked in your whole life. Look what I found. I found this picture of Dad when he was in the military in Thailand. Look at this picture. I've never seen this picture of Mom before. So I think that was surprising and rewarding. And I feel like it was therapeutic and kind of cathartic for the family.
Yeah, I think so. Calvin, did you have that same experience with your family not really knowing the history till you were a lot older?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because you know, like you hear of, you know, why your parents left and stuff, but not like the full scope of like the history of it. And I didn't grasp onto that until I was a lot older. You know, like you hear the stories of like the killing field and stuff like that, but in terms of knowing the history, no, not until I was a bit older to really understand and like take it fully in, that like it was quite dramatic, you know. So yeah, so I agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, and especially as the older generation gets even older, you know, if they don't take the time to tell those stories, as hard as it may be to share those stories, I think it's really important for, you know, the next generation to be aware of where their families come from and what they've endured, in order to make sense of a lot of other things that's happened in your life. You can start putting the pieces together a lot more. You can heal once you have the full picture. Because other than that, if it's just like all these this bits of darkness, then you kind of are just like left without that closure,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Alice, I believe you have another documentary coming down the line. Is that correct? Or you're supposed to start filming?
We're developing a couple of other projects that are in process right now. One deals with a common building material. I can't talk too much about it, but a common building material that we see everywhere, and we like it because, like the Donut King, it's kind of in plain sight, and it's so common that you never think about it. And it's thinking about this building material in a different way and how it's affected the world and population and how we live and the environment and global warming. And so it's talks about that on that kind of a bigger scale. And then another one is about Puerto Rican music and musicians through the ages. They came from Puerto Rico through New York and into modern day Latin music as we know it.
Great. We'll be on the lookout for that.
Thank you.
And Calvin, do you have any other projects coming up?
I'm currently in pre-production for a short, melodramatic short right now, just to kind of switch it up a little bit, and then hopefully find some funding for an adventure thriller that I've also been writing, and hopefully the funding comes through, and that's kind of where I'm heading right now. But first thing is the short.
Cool. Well, I hope that we'll have that at a future Cambodia Town Film Festival.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thanks guys. Is there anything you'd like to add before we sign off? Okay. Okay.
Nice to see the Donut King. Akun, everybody.
Thank you.
Akun, thank you.
Thank you.